All right. So this story to me is wild, but totally believable. Some guy named Derek Gunn, who is a reporter in Wisconsin, but runs an Eagles podcast on Twitter today, said that one of the reasons for the Eagles' collapse was the suspension of their security guard, Big Dom, from the sideline. And you could see here the summary of the tweet. It was on Pro Football Talk. Big Yak, Coach Yak on Twitter put up this graphic, and you could see Big Dom getting into it with Dre Greenlaw in that 49ers Eagles game. But according to this guy, real D Gun, Derek Gunn, the banishment of Big Dom from the sidelines hurt the Eagles down the stretch because he controls coach Nick Sirianni's emotions during games. Without Dom, Sirianni got in numerous arguments with players and coaches. First off, you mean to tell me that the guy who physically confronted a player on the sideline during an NFL game is the guy who's assigned with being the emotional regulator on the sideline? That has absolutely no chance to go wrong. There is no volatility whatsoever behind this setup with the Eagles slash sarcasm. I mean, to me, when you saw Nick Sirianni yell at the Kansas City fans, when you saw some of the smugness and attitude on the sideline, you could tell that obviously he's a fiery guy, and that's why this isn't surprising at all because he's obviously has a lot of emotional ups and downs on the sideline. But the fact that he's got somebody assigned to him, when I read that, I'm like, okay. But the fact that it was Big Dom, the guy who got into this altercation with Dre Greenlaw, I mean, then you start looking at this and you're like, well, no wonder Philadelphia absolutely combusted after they played the 49ers. They rode that high, and the high lasted through the 2022 season all the way to the loss to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl and then the 10-1 start here to the 2023 season. They rode that high just fine. This is what typically happens with teams that have emotional firestorms as their head coach. They can ride the highs really well, but then the moment that they get punched in the face and stuff starts going bad, they don't ride the lows very well. So the Eagles started 10-1 and finished 6-7. They were like the inverse of the 2017 49ers, who started 1-10 and finished 5-0. So I think if there were any question, and there wasn't, but we talked about this at the time, the 49ers absolutely broke the Eagles this year. Remember, the 49ers were already winning fairly big when the Big Dom incident happened. However, Philadelphia got a little bit, it seemed like they were on a little bit of a run when that happened. And then obviously Dre Greenlaw got ejected. The 49ers ended up quashing that momentum with a Deebo Samuel touchdown, one of many in that game right after this incident up on the screen. But sometimes you just can't make some of this stuff up. Big Dom also was in the locker room tunnel after the game, greeting the Eagles players. And he was telling each guy as they went by, we'll see him again. We'll see him again. Big Dom ended up being at the Super Bowl, I think, providing security for the Eagles owner. So his prophecy came true. He did see the 49ers again, although he didn't see them again as somebody that was watching over the whole Eagles team in that game. He was just there as an extra. So that all came full circle. Obviously, the 49ers played in the Super Bowl. They did lose to the Chiefs, so they didn't win the NFL title, but they won the NFC title this year. They took that from the Philadelphia Eagles. And my question moving forward, as we spin this forward, is can Philadelphia realistically challenge the 49ers again under Nick Sirianni? Is this team going to be able to find the rudder and the stability to be a top dog in the NFC again? Because this last year, they still had a decent offense. I think Jalen Hurts has taken way, way too much blame right now for what happened in Philadelphia. First off, Sirianni didn't, the staff underneath him, I don't think was competent this year. They didn't build in any blitz answers into the stuff that Jalen Hurts was seeing. And the 49ers did provide a blueprint for how to beat the Eagles. Nick Bosa was exactly right about that. But I think the schematics were just not there at a high level for Philadelphia. So Sirianni, and he probably had to convince Lurie to keep his job in Philly. But part of that plan to keep his job better have included an explanation of how the schematics are going to be better. And if he's an emotional wreck on the sidelines, as this report indicates, it's hard to believe that Philadelphia is going to be cool, calm, and collected enough to make the necessary counter adjustments to start seeing more real-time success at the NFL level. Even then, I thought Jalen Hurts actually played fine this year. I really do think that he was failed by the scheme around him because they had talent and they had the offensive line around him too. Who didn't play fine for the Eagles was their defense. They dropped to number 29 in the league. This is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. The bottom completely fell out after the 49ers exposed it in that game early December at Lincoln Financial Field. So I know Sirianni's gotten rid of his defensive coordinator. They replaced Sean Desai before the season was over last year. Matt Patricia started calling the plays. Didn't really help as the season progressed. But he's got to be the guy right now in the midst of this storm to stabilize everything with the Eagles, because what happened with the defense was terrible. Obviously, what happened with the offense wasn't any good either. He's got to make sure that he's got the staff in place to restore some kind of order. And when you got stuff like this coming out, even if it's not true, and this guy, Derek Gunn, runs an Eagles podcast, but even if it's not true, we know that Sirianni is wildly emotional, right, on the sideline. We've seen him yelling at fans. We've seen him yelling at Chiefs fans leaving the field. Imagine if Kyle Shanahan did something like that. Imagine if Bill Belichick did something like that. Imagine if Andy Reid did something like that. It just wouldn't happen. Right. So we already know that Sirianni is a super fiery guy. We know that they're going to be high highs, low lows, just in terms of his emotional personality. He's got to lead the Eagles out of a huge low, out of losing 6 of 7, out of the feeling that they were broken by that game in early December against the 49ers. And boy, it's a tough ask when stuff like this starts coming out, because again, even if somehow a stretch of the truth from this guy, then it's still noise that the Eagles have to deal with in this offseason. So just wild stuff coming out of Philadelphia, the Big Dom bombshell, something that I wanted to cover. I know it's the slower part of the offseason news cycle. We're waiting for the 49ers to hire their defensive coordinator. We'll see what happens there. Kyle Shanahan dealing with a little bit of staff upheaval. Obviously, Steve Wilkes was not the answer for San Francisco this year. He has to guide San Francisco to smoother waters. He has to get them into a position where he thinks that defense can start ascending again instead of declining. Because just like the Eagles, the 49ers defense did decline this year. The difference was they declined from the top spot to number 12. The Eagles declined from the number 2 spot to number 29. And that's obviously something that you cannot have. All right, interesting update. 49ers Eagles, will that continue to be a rivalry at the top of the NFC? Or has San Francisco's big victory this year and the Eagles' tailspin caused that to be a non-factor? We will find out. It's a note right now to keep in mind as we enter the meat of the offseason.